Can you adjust synthetic reeds? Well, in this video, I'm going to take 3 of my Legeres that are not so playable and try 3 different techniques to kind of adjust them and save them and see if it works. My name is Josh Gu, and I'm taking my years of experience learning, teaching, and performing, and sharing all of my best clarinet and music tips so you can get more out of your practice, and most importantly, have fun. You can learn more about all of my many resources at quickstartclarinet.com, and don't forget to subscribe to this channel and hit the bell to get notified when I post new videos. Before we get started fiddling with equipment, remember that more important than any piece of equipment is how you're playing it. And yes, we can find equipment that kind of balances a little bit better with what we naturally want to do, and we can make our reeds work a little bit better with our mouthpiece. And if that combination's happier, then it'll be easier for us to put in the right inputs. But if you aren't working on your clarinet fundamentals and your playing side of things, then all of this equipment fiddling will be basically pointless and worthless. So if you want to work more on your clarinet playing and your clarinet fundamentals, don't forget that I have a free members area with all of my best handouts with practice advice, music advice, and most importantly, a whole lot of clarinet fundamentals advice to help you be a stronger, more confident player completely for free. You just go to quickstartclarinet.com/get started and create your login, and then you have access to all of those free resources. So check that out at quickstartclarinet.com/get started. Now going on to kind of my methodology for this, I'm going to go through at least 3 reeds. I might do a 4th reed as well because I have some ideas for things that might be interesting for that one. And I'm going to go a reed at a time, sort of talk through what the characteristics are of that reed, do a little before playing test, put it through some kind of adjustment process. The adjustment processes I'm doing are boiling it, which I've heard helps make them softer. I'm going to try sanding and doing some kind of more traditional adjustment. I also might do a little bit of knife work and see how a reed knife works on the synthetic reed as well. And then I also have this kind of wacky trick that I'm going to try on reed number 3. And then, if I feel like it, reed number 4 is kind of a broken reed. It used to be a good reed, but then it got broken and the tips are kind of bent. The edges of the tips are kind of bent, and it's also just been played a lot and is pretty dead anyways. So that one might be a lost cause, but if it turns out good, I'll also include it. So let's go ahead and get started with reed number 1. So reed number 1 I got at Clarinet Fest in 2024. I should mention also that all of these reeds are Legere French Cut reeds. So this one's a 3.75, and it's basically, I marked it as an H+, which means that it feels really hard. This one is actually a fairly good reed. It's just really hard to play. So it sounds good and responds well, but it's just hurts my lungs to play because it takes so much support and effort to get going. I'll also mention too, as I'm putting these on, I'm really trying to be very precise and consistent about where I'm placing it on the mouthpiece, because sometimes that can make more of a difference than even the adjustments that you make to it. So I'm trying to keep the ligature tension and tightness the same, placement on the mouthpiece the same, all that good stuff. I'm also gonna try to be fairly controlled about what I'm actually playing to play test them. So this is reed number 1. So that gives you an idea of how it sounds on some loud articulation, high notes, low notes, soft, more delicate, gentle playing as well. And again, like I said, my feeling of this is if I put a lot of energy into it, it's actually a pretty darn good reed, but I have to put a lot of energy into it. So what I'm going to do with this one is I'm going to try boiling it, because I think that will kind of give us even change and even adjustment to it, where just hopefully all of the balance and ratios of things will stay the same, and it will just get a little bit softer, which is what I want for this one. All right, I've done all of my adjusting on all of the reeds, but we're going to start with reed number 1 here. I should say the way I'm editing this together makes it so you get to see kind of one reed before and after, next reed before and after, but of course for me, I tested all 4 of them before, I adjusted all 4 of them, and am now showing you the after. But I gotta say, I'm kind of sad that I made reed number 1 the first one that you're going to see, because I think the other ones are going to kind of disappoint a little bit in comparison. But what I did here, the exact kind of thing I did, I got a small pot of water up to kind of a rolling boil. I grabbed it with a pair of tongs on the butt end of the reed and stuck it in the water for like 1, 2, 3, pulled it out, shook it off, wiped it off, gave it some time to sit and cool down before playing it. So now you get to hear reed number 1 after boiling. And I gotta say, on this one, like mind-blowingly different. For just that little bit of time in the boiling water, made a huge change on this. I don't know how well it's coming across, which is also why I'm not playing a whole bunch of stuff and testing out a bunch of stuff, but I played these a fair bit before and after the adjustments doing other stuff, and this is wild. This was a very hard 3.75, and now it feels like a pretty darn soft 3.75. I'm not sure if I'm 100% happy with it. I definitely would recommend not holding it in the water for quite so long. And I have reed number 4 that I also experimented with boiling a little bit after seeing how impactful it was. So I'll talk about that more there. But yeah, this is like mind-blowing amount of change for just like 3 seconds in the water. And it's been probably a good 20-25 minutes since I boiled it, so it's had plenty of time to rest and really cool down, and it's definitely holding those changes and definitely feeling softer. I do feel like it's maybe, it doesn't feel like quite as good of a reed as when it was the hard version, but the hard one was unplayable. This one's kind of equally unplayable, but in a different way, unfortunately. But boiling absolutely drastically and significantly changes the reeds. Now for reed number 2. This one is also from Clarinet Fest in 2024, is also a 3.75. This one I marked as just an H without the plus, which meant that it's not extra hard, it's just kind of neutral hard. But this one has some other kind of finicky things. The reed number 1, the H plus, I feel like played well, but was just really hard. This one maybe doesn't play quite as well, but maybe also isn't quite as hard at the same time. But here's a test of reed number 2. So you can hear how on the louds it wasn't quite as stuffy and wasn't like so hard to get going, but then also when I tried to kind of change the dynamic and change the color on the high F, it wasn't as stable, so there wasn't as good of responsiveness with that. So for reed number 2, I'm going to try traditional adjusting, where I'm going to do some balance testing, do some sanding. I might try a little bit with a knife as well to see if a knife works on synthetic reeds. Speaking of kind of more traditional adjusting too, I've heard that the Reed Geek works really well on the synthetic reeds. I don't personally own a Reed Geek, but I would try it if I had one, but I've heard that they work well if you have a Reed Geek. But I'm just going to stick to my traditional tools of sanding and knife on this one and see what the results are. The actual adjustments I ended up doing with reed number 2 is I did a little bit of a balance test and found that the left side of the reed felt a little bit harder. So I went in with some 600 grit sandpaper. I put the reed on glass and sanded the kind of top left kind of ear of the reed, or the top left corner of the reed. Did a little bit across the tip, just a tiny bit, and also ended up going down the left rail a little bit too and sanded that just a tiny bit. I found with sanding this, it's very similar to how quickly the material comes off compared to a cane reed. It didn't take a whole lot more sanding or anything like that, and it was actually very easy to see the material coming off too. I'm not sure how well the camera will pick this up, but you can see kind of where it got sanded and where it didn't, better than a cane reed even, so that's kind of nice for adjusting. I did try down here a little bit with the knife to kind of take off a little bit of the bottom of the vamp a little bit to kind of open up the low notes. I also noticed that it looked like where the cut was a little bit higher on this side of the reed too, which was maybe why the left side of the reed was a little bit less responsive. So I tried to get that with the knife, but as you could see, the knife like really chewed up the plastic very quickly, which maybe is something to do with my kind of control of my knife skills and also just not being used to how it interacts with the synthetic versus the cane reed. I also forgot to mention the very first thing that I did was just sand the overall back of it to kind of flatten it out a little bit. When I laid it flat side down on the glass, there was the tiniest bit of rocking to it, which meant the back wasn't fully flat. That's always a good starting place, is just flattening out the back. And as I was doing it, I definitely found that flattening out the back made the biggest improvement. And then pretty much all of the other work that I did was hit or miss. It sometimes helped it a little bit, sometimes made it a little bit worse. I think I was pretty happy with where it was before I tested out the knife on the bottom, and then things got weird from there, and it started going down the classic reed adjusting route of like, oh, do a little bit here, and then I have to counterbalance that with a little bit here, and then have to go back and do a little bit on the first thing again, and then next thing you know, you've overworked your reeds. And I got a great piece of advice from Lynn, who has the Queen Reed channel, who said, when you're adjusting reeds, do just a little bit each day and give it a day to settle in, which I thought was great advice, because I very often will adjust and get it like feeling perfect for that day, and then the next day it's just terrible because it's was perfectly adjusted to how I was playing it in the moment, and then the next day was really bad. So without further ado, here's the playtest of reed number 2 after the adjustments. So you can maybe hear that it still has hardness to it. Overall, it's still feeling fairly hard and resistant, but it did kind of smooth things out a little bit in the responsiveness, so that's great. This one could be interesting because it's a little bit on the hard side to just dip it in the boiling water for like dipping out for half a second just to soften it ever so slightly. Could be nice for this reed and get it feeling really well, but overall not too bad. And I also want to point out 2 things. One, that when I was doing the adjustments, it felt like the adjustments had a very similar effect to how they have on cane reeds. So any adjustment I would do on a cane reed, when I did this on this, felt kind of like I got the same result as I would on a cane reed, which was nice. Number 2, there's definitely a lot of microplastics involved when you're sanding it. Like, you can see the little microplastics. There's no doubt that I'm inhaling those into my lungs too. So if you want to avoid microplastics, sanding the reeds maybe is not the way to go. For reed number 3, this is a strength 4.25 and is actually the very first of the Legere French Cut reeds that I got back in early spring of 2024, and I played on it a fair amount then when I got it, and then came back to it kind of at the end of 2024, or actually I think it was more like kind of spring of 2025, and played it again and was pretty happy with how it felt and how it sounded. But it's just been played on enough now that it's kind of a dead reed, I would call it. And even though it's technically a 4.25, it definitely feels harder than the hard 3.75s that I was trying for reeds 1 and 2. And this one's just kind of, yeah, in that dead zone where it's no longer really vibrating very well. So this is what that sounds like. So you can hear how it's like, it's working decently well, but it has that kind of like, sounds like a synthetic reed feel to it. And I find that that's kind of the case as these reeds get tired and die. They stop having as much kind of brilliance and resonance in their vibration and start sounding a little synthetic reedy. So the thing I'm going to try on this is kind of a wild trick that I've never tried on any reeds before, but I heard if you take just a very thin strip of electrical tape and kind of lay it right down the middle of the reed, that sort of gives it a little bit more spine and gives it a little bit more flexibility. So I'm going to experiment with that and see if I can bring this, what was once a good reed but is now dead, back to life. For reed number 3, hopefully you can see the adjustment that I made on this one. So I put just a tiny thin strip of electrical tape right down kind of the center of the reed, right down the spine. And I experimented a little bit with how close to the tip I got with it. I started very close to the tip, and that felt pretty good, and I was actually surprised that it wasn't making more of an impact on the responsiveness of it. And then I backed away a little bit, and I do think kind of backing away a little bit was better. So where I would probably have this go ideally is where the tape is like just inside your mouth, basically just to the top of the heart of the reed, which I think makes sense because the idea that we're doing here is we're adding more material to it, and also the tape is going to kind of pull ever so slightly. So we're kind of giving a little bit more springiness to the heart of the reed again. So I think we want it to go right over the top of the heart of the reed. I think where I'm at here is probably tiny bit too low for the kind of optimal positioning. Another interesting thing about this is how straight can you cut the tape and place it on the reed. Hopefully you can see mine is definitely a little bit kind of off-centered and a little bit crooked, and it's also not a consistent width all the way. So that could be interesting to see how those variables affect things as well. But I do think it made an improvement. Let's give it a listen. And that one might actually be the most playable out of all of them. I do want to add one interesting caveat though too. This was the second to last thing that I did in all the adjustments. So I played on all three other reeds and had adjusted all three other reeds and messed with them a little bit. And then I went back to reed number 4 and did one other thing real quick. But when I went to this before I even put the tape on and kind of did my preliminary testing of it after doing all the other adjustments, I was actually pretty happy with this reed now. So I don't know how much the tape is improving it, though I did notice the tape changed it a little bit. I did give it a little bit more responsiveness before I put the tape on. When I tried to play the super high C, it wasn't really happening. With the tape on, it was happening better. So I do think the tape did improve some things, especially made it a little bit stronger. I felt like the responsiveness and the synthetic readiness of it maybe got a little bit worse when I put the tape on. And then the big thing is that I kind of liked it before I put the tape on. So again, I don't know how much the tape was helping here, but it certainly did change it and certainly did make it a little bit springier and a little bit more of a harder reed, which is the idea behind it. So I think it works. Again, it maybe gets into the idea of how much adjusting is worth it in general, which I'll talk about in the end. For our fourth bonus reed, this one, if you can see, is pretty sad shape. You can see the edges are a little bit kind of bent and cracked. Also, you probably can't see, but the tip is also bent, where there's kind of all kinds of problems with this. This one was a really sad reed. This was actually one of my very favorite reeds. I called this a 3.75 S-, where it was on the soft side of the 3.75s, and it was probably my favorite reed. I got it also at Clarinet Fest in 2024, and this is actually one of the reeds. I had one other reed that's also kind of dead, but I had one other reed that I did almost all of my mouthpiece testing on, and this was the other one that I ended up liking a little bit more after doing all my mouthpiece testing. But this used to be my favorite reed, and then at one gig, like within 10 minutes of each other, I was sitting down and bumped one side of it and kind of bent that, and then like 10 minutes later bumped the other side of it, and it died at that gig, unfortunately. But let's see if even a broken reed, if there's anything we can do to fix it. But first, a little play test of how this sounds. And this one, it's kind of dead and broken. Reed number 3, that was just dead. You could tell it kind of sounded synthetic reedy. This one has all of those qualities, but even more so. I'm not 100% sure what I'm going to try with this, but I might try clipping the tip, because most of the damage is around the tip, so maybe if I clip that, it'll kind of bring it back to life. I also might try trimming off the edges as well, so that it doesn't have those bent parts, and it might be better with just no parts there rather than bent parts there. But this will be kind of the Frankenstein one, and we'll see if I'm able to make it any better at all with some creative solutions. So for this one, since it was really soft and the tip was really beat up, I wanted to start by just clipping the tip of the reed to see what happened. And I will give the disclaimer that my reed clipper is very old and rusty, and like came from a random clarinet case of one of my mom's clarinets, so who knows how old it is. It's definitely not very sharp. But when I went to try to clip it, it wouldn't clip with the reed clipper. So I had to go the old-fashioned route and trim the tip with scissors. I did get kind of a outline on it from the reed clipper of the shape, and then kind of followed that with the scissors. But you can see that that's like not the prettiest tip ever, which is certainly not helping things. I did find, though, interestingly, Clipping the tip felt, again, very similar to what would happen when you clip the tip of a cane reed, where it got a whole lot harder. I also clipped quite a bit off because, again, there was kind of a lot of damage at the tip. So I clipped a lot of it. It got a lot harder. But then I found so much success from boiling reed number 1 that I was like, well, now that it's really hard, let me try boiling it and see what happens. So I did boil it, and I did also be a little bit more controlled with my boiling, where I did it, grabbed it with the tongs, had the kind of rolling boil going, and just like dipped it in and pulled it out. So it was very quick. It was kind of like in, out was about the length of it. And that definitely also made a difference, and it made less of a difference than when I did it for the full 3 seconds. So that makes sense, and I think there is kind of a linear effect for how long it's in there. The problem is we don't know how linear that effect is going to be, where it's starting at, where it's ending, depending on the time, of course, too, and also how much softer you actually want your reed to be. So I can't give you like a specific number of seconds to hold it in. But I did it the in, out, dried it off, let it cool down a little bit, played it, and it was a little bit softer, but it still wasn't quite soft enough. So I did it again, and that also made it a little bit softer. And then I also let the water come down from a boil, so it wasn't really a rolling boil, but it was just like, had some small bubbles and was definitely hot. Did again a short dip, and that also had an effect on it and made it get a little bit softer. I will say that I felt like when I played it immediately after that third dip, it felt pretty good. And now it's not feeling quite as good as it did then. So the placement maybe could be a little bit different. Again, with this tip, it's probably very sensitive to a little bit of placement because the tip is so uneven, so that could be part of it as well. I was also just holding it on with my thumb when I tested it after the third time, or just really quickly. So there's a bunch of variables. Who knows really what it was, but it could possibly be that that third time the water wasn't quite as hot, it wasn't in there quite as long, so it might have been more of a temporary effect. Possibly, but that's all stuff to experiment with for sure. But let's give a listen to bonus reed number 4 with the clipped tip, and then boiled to try to soften it down after hardening it up so much. And that one, post-adjustment, is definitely the most unplayable out of them all. It did get harder when I clipped the tip, like you'd expect. It did get softer when I then boiled it, but it's still like not very responsive and not very good. And I could mess with it more, but I don't think I'm gonna, which kind of brings me to the conclusion of this, that I think all of these adjustments worked and are doable and reacted the way that I would expect them to react, which was kind of cool, because I feel like sometimes with synthetic reeds, you never know what's going to happen. Same thing with cane reeds too. You never know what's going to happen as you get into adjusting things. But what I was expecting is what happened, so that was very cool. But I don't know if any of them got hands down better, and I think they all got a little bit better, but I don't think I was able to take any of these like relatively unplayable reeds and make them fully playable. I think with basically all of them, they went from having certain problems to having different problems, and I think that's kind of the moral of the story when it comes to adjusting reeds, and probably reeds in general, and probably all of equipment in general. It's always a compromise, where you're going to find some things that you like a little bit better about something, and other things that you like a little bit better about something else. And maybe if you get really good at adjusting, you can find the nuance to make the very subtle adjustments that are going to make a difference. For example, I think on reed number 1, if I had just done like 1.5 seconds in the water, I think I might really like that. For reed number 2, if I had stopped it just flattening the back, I think that would have been a good improvement and wouldn't have introduced the new problems that I introduced to it. So I think there's some nuance to it, and if you feel like you're really skilled working with reeds, I think basically anything you can do to a cane reed, you can do to a synthetic reed in a very similar way. I also think that boiling is not something you would do to a cane reed, but is very, very, very effective for just overall softening up a synthetic reed, which I find often to be the case, is that they're a little hard and a little unresponsive, so just a quick dip in the water could be great. I also did an experiment with not kind of submerging at least the whole vamp of the reed, but it could be interesting to like just the tiniest bit of the tip to increase responsiveness very well could be a thing that's effective. But at the end of the day, what I really want you all to take home is to remember that Legere has an exchange program. And I'll put a link to that in the description. But I think that's going to be better than doing any of this adjusting, especially with like sanding and the microplastics, and also who knows when you boil it, how that might change things and make it more carcinogenic or whatever, and just the control of it. I think probably every time it takes a little more patience, but I think every time you'd probably be better off just contacting Legere, exchanging your reed for another one that's going to be a little bit more, hopefully a little bit more what you're looking for. But they're pretty flexible with their exchanges, and which is great and wonderful, and I really appreciate about them. So I think exchanging is the way to go before adjusting. But if you're really experienced with adjusting reeds and you want to experiment a little bit, or you have a really old one that isn't gonna be exchangeable, or a dead one that's like, it was a really good reed but it's a little bit dead and you want to try throwing a little electrical tape on it, go for it. But overall, if it's a new reed and you're not happy with how it plays, just exchange it and you'll be better off than messing with all of the adjustments. So I hope that this was an interesting video. Let me know if you have any questions in the comments or any other things you've done that are really successful for adjusting synthetic reeds. Thanks so much for watching this video, and I look forward to seeing you in another one. And last but not least, a huge heartfelt thank you to the Dennersons. This is like the Quick Start Clarinet family who supports the channel and helps to make everything that I do possible. If you would like to support the channel and get some awesome rewards in return where we can work one-on-one over video and you can have my full support moving forward on your clarinet journey, then go to quickstartclarinet.com/supporter.